Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Riverside Community Health Foundation's Community Q&A episode, where we invite different experts to answer your questions. Make sure you like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more great conversations. For this episode, we'll be talking about how trauma manifests at the community level and how it has a profound impact for all of us. I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Nakomi. Nakomi Higgins, also known as Nikki, is a welcome, respected businesswoman, mentor, mental health advocate, licensed psychotherapist, and passionate communicator determined to make positive impact in the lives of women around the world. She has had the good fortune to have a varied and rich life, not free from adversity, but shaped by it. Through the use of humor and storytelling, Nakomi speaks to educate, empower, and evoke connection. More importantly, she speaks to shift mindsets to states of awareness that embrace the important connections between emotional health, spiritual wellness, and goal manifestation. Welcome, Nakomi. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome.
We're so glad. As everybody knows, we as a collective community, not just here in Riverside, but really worldwide, are experiencing community trauma. And just the other day, Riverside Community Health Foundation made a post about community trauma, and I'm going to read that definition and love to hear more about what your perspective is on community trauma. So what we posted says, community trauma affects social groups or neighborhoods long subjected to interpersonal violence, structural violence, and historical harms. Research suggests that the cause of community trauma lie in the historic and ongoing root causes of social inequities, including poverty, racism, sexism, oppression, and power dynamics, and the erasure of culture and communities. And so now that we kind of have a little bit of a baseline understanding, can you tell me and can you expound on what really is community trauma?
You know, I love this question. And as I have said before, first of all, thank you for even having the conversation, because when we can create space for conversations like this, we're ultimately also beginning the steps towards change. And when we're looking at community trauma, we're not just talking about the individual trauma experience. Now, we are including it in the conversation. And a lot of us in the world of advocacy and mental health, we're leaning into how to better help people heal from their individual trauma. But on the community level, what we're looking at is trauma through the lens of historical trauma, right? And so what has been the cultural experience of those members of the community and their experience with oppression. We're looking at structural violence. And this is a really key thing, because we're not just talking about law enforcement, but we're talking about financial institutions. We're talking about educational institutions. We're talking about medical institutions, and how all of these organized structures are coming together, and based on their way of operating is putting that community at a disadvantage, or disadvantaged place, or putting them in a place of harm. Okay, whether it be isolating poverty to a community, whether it be limiting resources to that community, we're looking at the structural violence that is taking place in this community that's perpetuating trauma. And then we're also looking at behavioral violence, right? And a lot of people like to sit comfortably in this space of the individual needs to take responsibility for the violence that they commit in a community, but we also have to honor that sometimes that individual is a product of the community trauma. And as mental health, as a mental health professional, we understand clearly that people don't always choose healthy ways to numb and to cope and to navigate feeling oppressed and unheard and underserved. And so community trauma really challenges systemic structures that are in place that are hurting communities and therefore preventing them from really thriving. So it's a big conversation, huge.
That is a huge conversation. Thank you so much for I feel like you put it really succinctly and kind of were able to give some more pinpoints. And so we want to interact with our community, those who are watching with us right now. We'd love for you to give us a thumbs up in the comment, or a yes or a no. Do you feel like you have a little bit better understanding of community trauma? And we're going to be talking more about it during our time together, but we'd love to know where you are right now. Do you have a better understanding? Just let us know in the comments below. So as we continue on with our questions today, I mean, because this expounds, of course, not just within one community, but we're going to speak specifically to the African American community. And so our next question is, why do other minorities feel as if they are exempt from what is happening and has happened to African Americans?
Whew, I love this question so much. You know, I'm going to again share a perspective, and I cannot speak for all people of color, but one of the things that I have come to understand is that we each have an idea of America. And if we are recent immigrants to this country, or we are from a long line, you know, a long generation of immigrants in this country, our family systems, our cultures are really rooted in a belief system about what this country is supposed to stand for. But I think what a lot of people or other people of color sometimes aren't included in on the conversation is the Black experience. I think that Black America is not always acknowledged for their contributions to American society. I think that the stress and the struggle, or the strife and the struggle, is oftentimes focused upon, but it's focused on within the context of the past, not so much the present. And so I don't think that people are shown transparently the fabric of our country and the complexity of our politics and our motivations behind keeping certain communities oppressed, specifically the Black community. And so because of that, I think that people are kind of creating perspectives that aren't holistic, right? They don't include all of the fundamental pieces that are very important when really evaluating and making sense of a place that you call home. I also want to say that a lot of people subscribe to the belief that if it hasn't happened to me directly, then it must not exist, or it must not be that bad. And so we have a lot of people who are choosing to live in a bubble because it's safe. And of course, again, subscribing to the idea that, well, it doesn't happen to me, or it hasn't happened to me, or it only happened once and I was able to get over it. And so when we give those kinds of passes, what we tend not to do, however, is really look at the problem at a deeper level. So that's, you know, again, that's my perspective. But I think that, and I also am just going to be honest, is I think people are afraid to really look at I think a lot of people are afraid to look at it. And I think it's isolated. I don't want to say it's isolated only to Black Americans, but it definitely is very concentrated. And sometimes that's actually comfortable for people, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's really interesting how we can find ourselves in places that are like, I think I'm comfortable. I feel really comfortable right here.
I want to stay here.
Right. I don't know what's going to happen if I have to like expand or open up a little bit more. Which kind of goes right into our next question a little bit, getting outside of your comfort zone and or if it's a job or not. Our next question is it my job to help non-Black people not do and say racist things when asking about my personal Black experience? Lots of discomfort.
You know, this is a really, really good question. And in my work, I'm actually getting it a lot. I'm going to be honest in saying it's your responsibility to make that decision for yourself. I think that there are Black Americans that want to stand on the front lines and be the educator and make sure that the narrative is understood a certain way. And I think that we can support them in that. But if you're also choosing to say, that is not the role that I want to play in this movement, you have that right as well. I think the goal is that whichever position you take, it is a respected one. Because choice, at the end of the day, is how we create ownership in this movement. It's how we create our own piece of pie. We're all trying to figure out, how do we want to move this movement forward, but most importantly, how do we establish sustainable change? And so there are going to be some Black Americans that are saying, it is not my job. If you want to show me that you're invested in this change, then I need to see you take the initiative that is required to build your own awareness and knowledge. We've had to piece together our history. And there are, again, going to be some Black Americans that are going to say, let me make sure you get this right, whether it be through sharing my personal experience, or it simply be by pointing you in the right direction. Either way it happens. Again, I ask people who are asking Black Americans for this guidance to respect the choice and the position that they take, and understand that it's not necessarily about them. It's about a sense of exhaustion, a sense of their own need to process and space to process, and not feel a responsibility to have to help you through your process.
That's right. Personal responsibility. Yes. On all levels. And I'm sure that's like its own conversation on its own. So we're just going to move right along to our next question. I have guilt about my white privilege, somebody asked, but what can I do to support the Black community in a compassionate and meaningful way without adding to the problem?
I want to, and it's kind of also segueing in, along that vein of personal responsibility. The only way that change is sustainable is if we take personal responsibility. I tell my clients a lot of times in the therapy room, like, let's sit with your guilt and understand your guilt, but we cannot allow your guilt to make you inactive. At the end of the day, I think becoming aware of your white privilege is a start, but we don't need to overcomplicate what it means to be compassionate, what it means to be respectful. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate those very innate human abilities because we are questioning whether or not we're doing it the right or the wrong way. It's showing up authentically. Again, it's you can acknowledge, you can be aware of, but I encourage you, do not allow your guilt to paralyze you and to impair your ability to see that compassion and kindness and respect and boundaries are things that we as humans are kind of taught and can definitely practice on a day-to-day basis without it having to have a color attached to it.
We can just treat the humans like humans.
Yes. Humans like humans.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so we want to come back to our community. How are you feeling? Dr. Ms. Nakomi has really shared a lot of good information up until now, especially for those who might be part of the non-Black community. Do you feel like you could participate in these hard conversations? It is, like she said before, we have to kind of gauge our own selves and be responsible for what's been put on our heart. But do you feel like it's something that you could consider? We'd love to know. Drop a comment in the box below. As we move right along, we would like to know, this is a community trauma. It's a traumatic experience for the community that we're going through on so many different levels. And I feel like it's really been compacted by the pandemic as well. And so one of the questions that was asked is, how do I know if I'm falling back into depression because of recent events? Like, how can we gauge that and notice some of our signs?
The first thing that I want to say, if you're feeling depressed, then you're probably experiencing some depression. I think that the pandemic really forced a lot of us to sit with ourselves. We weren't allowed we were no longer allowed, based on the pandemic, to avoid a lot of things that we were avoiding in our doing, right? We were keeping ourselves so busy in this world that for disenfranchised communities, they were forced to really sit in that. For communities who were trying to numb out the racism and the oppression, and we were no longer allowed to run from the ugly that is very much integrated into our society. And so when we were sitting still, I'm actually not surprised at the fact that we are responding in this way because we were finally forced to see it for what
Yeah.
it is and
Mhm.
sit with ourselves and how we, how have we perpetuated the problem? How have we dismissed the problem or give the
Yeah.
problem a pass? How have we
Mhm.
ourselves not taking responsibility for our role? And those are really, really hard questions. That's why people don't always like therapy, because we're asking you to look at you. And I always tell my clients, when you look in a broken mirror, you're going to get a broken reflection. And that's what we were seeing and feeling a little disempowered, right? Or powerless. And so if you are experiencing sadness and depression and you're feeling, you're losing motivation, you don't feel motivated to do anything. If you are not feeling passionate to get involved in any way, shape, or form, and you just want to really stay isolated to your home and close the windows and just try to shut the world out, if you are internally under mental attack, i.e., you're just launching insults against yourself and how you can be better and do better, then it is important that you understand now is the time to seek that help from a mental health professional, because you're potentially getting stuck in a cycle of thinking that can greatly impair your ability to move forward and take that next step.
Like, and speaking of moving forward, like especially under that umbrella, our next question kind of is related to that. Like, as Black people, how do we navigate even the day-to-day living and show up in our respective places like work and school while feeling these feelings, sadness, depression, anger? How can we navigate that with all of this that's going on internally?
Yeah. One thing that's hard about being a Black American is this is not the first time that we've had to navigate life with sadness, and stress, and disappointment. We have been thriving as a people for generations, unfortunately, with these emotions on our hearts. We have not had safe spaces to convey them because they have often been minimized, or we've been told that we're overreacting. And so we've kept them to ourselves. And my charge is, it is time to talk about it. It is time to seek the support that you need so that you can function. Because what's starting to happen is these emotions that we are not speaking about are being stored in our mindsets. They're being stored in our bodies and manifesting through ailments that cause greater harm to ourselves, to our communities. And so, my word of advice to you is to remember our resilience. Yes, we are tired. And some of us are even like, why are we just now getting it? I hope the whole pandemic conversation helps bring that to light. We were finally put on pause to see it. But we are a strong people. I think the question is not so much how do I function in this sadness, but it's how do I use this sadness? How do I use this frustration and channel it in a way that moves me further, that evolves my mindset, that breaks me from the conditioning that even I might have been exposed to. I will just be honest in saying that there are several movements that are going on within this movement. And I think there is definitely a call to action to Black Americans to really break free on many levels, or to identify the conditioning and to really reclaim a sense of authority and power. And that's going to look different for everyone. It's going to look different for everyone. So I hope that answers that question. That's a big one.
It's a big question. No, it is. I absolutely agree. I think everything you said was really good. And I mean, it just, again, goes back to being honest about everything. I feel like in the workplace, we haven't had a lot of, there hasn't been a space in general to like talk about your feelings. You just have to get there and here's your productivity. Here's the thing that you do. And we can't
Yeah.
really be honest about what's going on. And when there's space for this, then I feel like, well, you can have more understanding about how we navigate and what our Black experience is, so to speak. But then also we can going back to some of those other questions from earlier, like it's easier to cultivate compassion for one another and where they are if we can feel safe enough to be honest in those regular spaces.
And I just want to say this too, and to that question, because I do want to validate the experience as a mental health professional. I have found myself, like many of my colleagues, both holding space for my emotional trauma and my feelings while holding space for others. And so it is hard to process a lot of what is going on and also function and provide. And so I will say, understand what you need and know that there are professionals that are there to create space for you to process what you're feeling. It's what my clients bring to me every day, and we are diving into the big conversations. But your frustration is righteous, right? It's justified, and it's giving yourself permission to feel your feelings, and also allowing yourself to seek the support for it as well.
So no, this is a hard one. This is something that this next question it hits me home a little bit, because I'm like, there's this common knowledge, especially within the Black community, that you have to have the talk with your children, especially your sons, when it comes to like having to navigate the police and how that works. And I'm in my own home trying to kind of wanting to know, how else can we address racism? But what are the signs that my child is having a difficult time coping with the violence, and what can I do to help with that?
Oh, I absolutely love this. One of my dear colleagues, Mercedes Samudio, and she is a parent coach, we were having this conversation, and we first have to start by asking our children what they're noticing. You know, what are you experiencing first?
Yeah.
And before we kind of immediately start to interpret, we have a tendency to adult-splain over children and not necessarily hear them. But specific signs that we're going to be looking for are fear. You know, are our little ones afraid to detach from mom and dad? If mom has to go to the grocery store, are our children afraid? Are they worried? If we're seeing that, we have to create space to ask what they're afraid of. Are we seeing our children actually kind of emulate the violence or kind of play the violence out in the home? You know, it's looking at, where is that coming from? Listening to their language. Are they afraid to go outside? I remember when the pandemic had really just started. My son, you could not tell me, my son believed the coronavirus was this thing that was walking around the street. And it was like, I don't want to go outside. My son is 6. I don't want to go outside because the coronavirus is out there, you know? And so it was really about, it's really about listening to them. It's about paying attention to how they're moving through space and time, and does it feel different than it has in the past? And again, we're looking at fear, and we're looking at sadness, and giving our kids space to talk about those things.
And as we give them space to talk about it, and we kind of understand their feelings, like, how can we talk to our kids about race? How can we have an effective conversation with our children about race and racism? And I feel like there's multiple sides to that. Of course, there's people who are non-Black who would like to talk to their children, but I also want to know, like, how and what can, as Black families, how can we also talk to our children about it without, you know, I feel like it's so charged, at least for me personally, emotionally, like, it's the thing, it shouldn't be happening. And this is also the world that we live in, and I want to be able to reframe it so it's nothing that's scary, but they're also really aware.
Yeah. Well, I think first, as parents, we have to understand that there's no rule book on how to do this. Yes, there might be a lot of books out there, but at the end of the day, we're all kind of doing this as we go. And so we really need to understand what race and racism means to us. And we need to understand how we navigate through this world with that understanding. Once we've sat with ourselves for a moment, I do think it's important to really talk to our children as transparently as is age developed, you know, that is age appropriate. Because I think kids see a lot of things. And you get to, you know, your children, you know, kind of their processing ability. I think denying them some level of transparency could be a big hindrance, and it's only really perpetuating this bubble. It can also hinder their ability to navigate diversity. And that's what we really want to talk about, is the beauty in diversity. That is our country's strength, or it definitely can be, if we really know how to use it to move us towards a common goal and vision. And so it's helping our kids understand the beauty in diversity, specifically their beauty, their contributions. I think it's important for parents, even though history isn't taught in their schools, we need to get back to teaching our children their history so that they're not just connected to, again, the struggles and strife of the Black American, because we have contributed in dynamic ways, right? And then I also think it's about really sitting down with our babies and listening. It's listening to where they stand and what they are trying to understand, and going from there. And there was something else that I was going to say, and I'm sure it'll come up to me as soon as you get to that next question, so I might just have to come back to it.
No worries. No worries. And then any tips or anything or research or something for folks who are trying to have that conversation with the children who are not in the Black community?
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I think one of the things that we also have to understand is that in order for us to have a really effective conversation with our children, we also have to take accountability of how we sit in that space, right? It is a charged conversation, I think, for non-Black Americans, or I think other people of color. You have to be willing to own how you have perpetuated certain stigmas or prejudices or racism itself, and also be able to speak to how you are going to take the steps to change, because that's what parenting is, right? We're teaching our kids not only how to take accountability for our involvement in a situation, but also how to take ownership of the role that we're going to take on to change the problem. So my first step, my first suggestion is just really understand what all of this means to you. Be prepared to take responsibility. I would hate if we just raise a lot of children who are pointing the finger. And then demonstrate on a daily basis your commitment to the change that you are aligning with. And so, start the conversation off with honesty and transparency, naturally age appropriate. Listen to your kids and just be willing to and prepared to show them how you're going to change and do differently.
Awesome. So our next question, thank you for those responses. It says, how can we as a community start a support group to expand on the questions, what happened to you, instead of what's wrong with you?
Can I be honest in saying that I think we know what we want to do? I mean, so many people who have their vision of the life they want to live, the community they want to cultivate, so many people see it. And I think when we're asking that question of how, and I'm going to ask you really quickly if you can pull that question up while I speak through it. Again, if you can go back to that question, because I want to point out how simple it is to drive change. Thank you. In order to start a support group, we simply ask the right question. What happened to you instead? That's how we started. What happened to you? Okay. And when we create space, and sometimes we think that in order to create space, we have to do so with large numbers of people. And I think, and you're welcome to take that question off if you want to. I think what we really have to understand on the community level is that change has to happen on the individual and the community level and roll up, right? We start with who we have. We start with who is willing to sit at the table. We start with our authenticity. We don't have to make it perfect. We just have to say, this is a support group that is going to help you talk about what has happened to you. All are welcome. All are welcome. I hope that answers the question. I just feel like sometimes we overcomplicate what is so innately good about us as human beings.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing that came to my mind while you were talking, I think because people are they don't know how to navigate, there's a fear. There's a lot of fear behind that's like motivating them or keeping them paralyzed or motivating for inaction instead. And so a lot of times people are just like, I'm too scared. I don't want to, or, so I think that's part of it. Yeah.
And can I say that this is a movement about discomfort? I want to say that fear, well, let me take it a step back. Change is one of those things that is always going to be uncomfortable. And I think we try to make it as convenient as possible because our society really promotes that control is the good thing and change is scary and bad.
Mhm.
Humans were built to change. We were built to evolve with time, literally built for it. It's in our DNA, right? And I think that what we're asking today is not so much the how, because a lot of us have the desire and the vision. I think the real question is, are my convictions strong enough to get uncomfortable to make it happen? Are my convictions strong enough to stay with this movement, right? And that's where we're at. We're really having to evaluate how determined are we to drive this change forward? Because if that determination is present, then we have to prepare ourselves to get uncomfortable. And let's just be real, people don't like to be uncomfortable.
They're not
So
here
that's where that fear is coming from. What do people think? And how do they feel? And what will they say? That's the thing we have to move through.
Dr. Shane, please want to add something? Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say, as representing the Riverside Community Health Foundation, as the Vice President of Health Strategies, as Nakomi is referring to, if you are really interested in being a part of a support group or being a part of a group who has the interests of the Black community at heart, the foundation does support the Coalition for Black Health and Wellness. That's one. So that is open to the community members if you want to be a part of that. We're also just a foundation who creates space for community to come together. So you can put a comment in the chat. You can let us know if you want to be more involved, just kind of as receiving support for the things that we're dealing with right now. And we will be open to assisting you in that way.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shanae.
Of course.
Yes. And that, I mean, yes, I love how there's always space at Riverside Community Health Foundation for things to be created and evolve to address what's going on with it right now. So I thank you. And then we have one last question, which again, I feel like it applies to both communities. And that last question is, I feel powerless and guilty and I'm not doing enough. And of course, there's that infamous, what can I do? What can I do?
So, I asked, what does more look like? Right? I mean, that's the starting place, right? What, if you don't feel like you're doing enough, what does more look like? Change starts with initiative. It starts with you really looking at, how do I take initiative to take the next step? And again, I really want to sit with these emotions of guilt that can also manifest shame, that can also leave us feeling powerless and our vision and our clarity impaired. It's okay to acknowledge that those feelings exist. But again, what does more look like? And then are you willing to take the initiatives to do the more? Always know that anything that's going to scare you a little bit is probably the direction that you should be going in. And so if you are feeling that guilt and you're feeling like you're doing enough, sit down tonight and really ask yourself, what does more look like? What might it look like? How uncomfortable will I get if I do more? Is this stretching me beyond my perceived limitations? Because if it is stretching me beyond my perceived limitations, then how can I seek the support to prepare me for the more that I want to contribute to this world? So these are all really powerful questions that we have to ask ourselves. And again, I want to encourage everyone, acknowledge how you're feeling, feel the feels, but it's so easy for us to get stuck in the feelings and feel powerless as a result. There is more certainty available to us than we're giving ourselves credit for seeing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm like, I mean, that needs to stick down to my spirit personally. Okay, I'm ready, I think. Wow, that was a lot of incredible information. I deeply appreciate the sharing that you've given to us, to me personally, to this community. Thank you for joining us, Nakomi, and sharing your insight and your knowledge about community trauma. And to our community, we are glad that you were with us as well. And if you enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comment section below We are going to be doing more with Nakomi coming up just next week. Our little spin-off episode, and this is our new series. It's called Let's Talk About Community Trauma. Our little time together is not enough. And so Nakomi will be joining us once again next week, Friday at 3 p.m. to share with us 4 ways to navigate through guilt and anxiety in response to the community trauma. Again, if you'd like this comment, please feel free to comment below and give us more ideas of what you would like to learn. And don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more great conversations. And thank you so much, Nakomi. We're so glad you were able to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.